Good morning, everyone. Still admitting a few folks into the meeting.
I got it, Ruthie.
Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Thank you again for your participation in the IT and professional services industry town hall back in July. As leaders in your industry and in our community, you indicated a strong interest in continuing to engage as an industry to talk about best practices, resource information, and workforce needs. So we welcome you back this morning. And Ellen, would you like to take it from here?
Yes, good morning and welcome. As Ruthie stated, we're so glad that you were able to join us this morning. This is the first of what we hope to be some robust and insightful conversations around the needs of IT industry. But first, we want to follow up with you on a couple of items that we discussed during our last meeting that were of importance to you to let you know where we are. During our last meeting, you indicated that there was a interest in having new hires that possessed a career readiness certification that certified their ability to think critically, analyze work, to work independently and to communicate effectively. We shared with you just briefly an invitation to a meeting that was held on August the 27th, where we discussed the ACT National Career Readiness Certification with members of our community. I'm not sure how many of you were able to join, but we had a representative from ACT answer questions from with our industry leaders and our partners regarding the National Career Readiness Certification and the designation of communities that choose to become work ready. And that work ready designation is happening throughout the United States for communities that come together and support the implementation of the National Career Readiness Certification Standards. And that requires a collaboration with the K through 12 systems, the county governments through their economic development arms, as well as your workforce development boards and your higher education system to provide this type of certification for job seekers in the region. The wonderful thing is that during the attendance at that meeting and the robust conversation that occurred, we solidified the commitment and the interest from many within the community to pursue that designation. And so you'll be seeing more information if you have not already from your regional chambers of commerce and some of the workforce partners asking you to sign up in your support of us pursuing that designation. And we'll be working with ACT to host a regional, what they call boot camp, sometime later this winter to support this effort. So you'll see more information about that, but I'm excited to announce that we're moving forward with that initiative. Secondly, you talked about some real workforce challenges that you feel you were either facing at the time or would certainly be important to your workforce as you emerge from the pandemic. And we look forward to hearing from you today. A big part of this discussion will be, again, getting feedback from you. But you indicated that worker productivity in the remote work environment was a challenge and that you felt that more importantly than ever, leadership training was going to be important and having your leaders learn how to manage and work with remote teams. And I think lastly, you talked about the need to increase digital marketing and social media training opportunities. I want to let you know that those opportunities, each of those that I previously listed, are available at the College of Southern Maryland. And so we do encourage you, based on your feedback, we do encourage you to reach out to Ms. Kelly Winters, who's joined us. She's here. Kelly, if you'd put your email in the chat again, and her team. for information about those trainings. If you're interested, we can work with you to have that training delivered for your full team or for members of your team that you're interested in. You also, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, you also talked about the huge emotional impact that the pandemic was having on your workforce and their ability to work. We think as time goes on that we adjust and we get used to it, but I think very often what we're doing is just resolute about the fact that we need to remain productive. People very often still need an outlet. And so various wellness training opportunities, health and mindfulness training opportunities are available. And so we also ask that if that's an interest for you and your team, that you have those conversations with us here at CSM, because we can deliver that for members of your team or your entire team. Kelly, I'm going to just ask, do you have any other specific updates, you or Paula, that you want to talk about IT training specifically before we turn it back to Ruthie?
Good morning, everyone. No, Ellen, I wouldn't add anything. I think you got everything covered, unless Paula's has something to add about any recent IT stuff.
Okay, Ruthie, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. Before we engage in our roundtable discussion, I just wanted to throw out a few things that the Workforce Development Board has available for all businesses in our region. We frequently hold what we call customized recruitments, which means if you have a job opening, we will advertise that opening, we will recruit candidates, we will vet the candidates to make sure that they meet your requirements, and we'll get together virtually, which is working very well, to enable you to have a discussion with these candidates and recruit. So we can do that at any point for any openings, one or more that you have. Of course, there's no charge for any of this. We also can post your openings in the Maryland Workforce Exchange, which is our state job board, and it's very comprehensive. It spiders in job openings from websites, from classified ads, from Indeed, etc. So it is comprehensive, and in the Maryland Workforce Exchange, people upload their resumes, so we can do some job matching for you that way as well. In addition to that, we have funds for training your workers. They're called incumbent worker training grants to upskill your current staff and hopefully move them up in your organization and leave an opening for someone new to join you. So we have that as available as well, and on-the-job training grants to offset the costs of training a new hire. So if you bring somebody on, depending upon the size of your company, we can offset 50 to 90% of the costs of training that new employee. So I wanted to just throw that out there to make sure that you understand what we have available. Belinda, would you like to add anything?
Hi, good morning, Ruthie. No, I think you about covered it. I just, might want to point out that any of the trainings that you choose to do, whether they're from CSM, which we are happy to support training with our funding for CSM, or any other training provider. So I was going to go ahead and put my email in the chat box. If you had any, additional questions for training, I'd be happy to ask them. Answer them. Not ask, answer.
Thank you, Belinda. Okay, Ellen, would you like to kick off the group discussion?
Certainly. So, truly the purpose of these meetings is for us to hear from you. But we did want to provide you those updates because these were the things that you told us that you were the most concerned about. And we wanted to let you know what your workforce system is doing to respond. But we want to open the open dialogue portion of this meeting by posing a question to you. And then we can certainly move from that question on to any other subject matter topics that you would like to discuss, because this is your opportunity to connect with each other and to inform us about your needs. So the first question that we have for you is, now that schools are open, what impact has this had on your labor force or your operations? So I believe we have a facilitator that will acknowledge you if you raise your hand. So that's the way we're going to make sure we get everyone's responses. So if you would raise your hand, the facilitator will call on you and you can respond to that question, which I'll repeat. Now that schools are open, what impact has this had on your labor force or your operations? If any. Okay.
Hey, this is Dottie Simeona.
Hello, go ahead.
What we're sensing over the last couple of weeks has been the bandwidth, for systems, definitely doing the virtual support that's happening. That's definitely having an impact on multiple people, but just trying to give staff the flexibility of time to work with their kids at home, to get them online. We kind of did some slowing down of canceling meetings for the first week that school started, so that we could give flexibility to the parents to tend to their children and getting them online. So that seems to be working right now. We have trying to refocus on what meetings need to take place and which ones do not, and allowing people the flexibility with their work schedule.
Thank you, Dottie. Other comments? So if the school reopening is not largely impacting your operations, let's open this up to just general feedback about how you're recovering and what additional challenges or successes you've had since our last discussion in this new COVID environment.
Yeah, so here's Dottie again. I think the other thing is it added more stress. I think when we went into COVID first, with schools, it was one thing, but when it came back online, you sense an up tempo, and our staff worried about how they were going to get their kids back into schools. And I think it's added another complexity of already a stressed out workforce.
Mhm.
And and now, given what might happen with kids going back to 2 days a week over the next couple of months, they're concerned with that because they need to get them there, or they're choosing to keep their kids at home, and they want to make sure if they choose to keep their kids at home, they still have the flexibility and, have the support.
Thank you, Dottie.
Now,
Others?
hi, this is Scott Mewany. I'm also with Booz Allen, and just to kind of echo Dottie's comments, it's a real dilemma. I have my youngest son is a senior at Leonardtown High School, and he was in the tech center. He was taking a welding class. Well, he can't weld at home, unfortunately. So there's a part of us that want him to get back to the school so he can get back into that welding class because he enjoyed it so much and he was very passionate about it. And online learning is a bit of a challenge for him, but we're terrified for him to go back to school for the simple reason that our oldest son has a compromised immune system. So we're facing this dilemma. What's best for our family, and it really tears at us. And we've had a lot of conversations about it, my wife and I, and we still don't know what we're going to do. I know they kicked the can down the road a little bit in terms of when he would go back to school, but at some point we're going to have to make that decision, and it's a difficult decision, and it's just I know we're not the only family facing this dilemma.
Thank you for sharing.
I think we heard in other meetings this month with other industries the same concerns. We also heard that there are businesses that are allowing their employees that need to come in to bring their children in and put them in a conference room or another space where they can accomplish their work, and so can the parents. So that kind of flexibility is important, but I certainly understand where you're coming from, Scott. My husband, in fact, has underlying conditions, and we worry all the time about bringing something in or him picking something up. So we're not there yet. I mean, we don't have a vaccine. We don't know where this is going, and it is adding additional stress.
Ruthie, Douglas Bevan has a question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay? Over?
Yes.
All right, terrific. Good morning. My name is Doug Belvin. I am the Director of Operations within the Defense Solutions Business Unit at Smartronics in Hollywood. For those who I haven't met, my background includes I've been in the Navy for 26 years, including almost 20 years at Pax River, before being fortunate to come on board with Smartronics, been there for a little over a year. So I just wanted to respond to the question of challenges and successes in the COVID environment from our perspective. Over.
That's wonderful, Doug. Go right ahead.
So the one observation I'll make to this group is telework and just almost the mindset or approach to telework. There was an assumption, I'd say, within the Navy and even within, to my impressions of the company, over what is the nature of the work that is amenable to telework, and how do you find people and recruit talent and onboard a workforce. And there's just some assumptions that everybody understood about, you got to meet people face to face, and there's a certain geographic connection that candidates have to have. And a bunch of those assumptions have been fundamentally changed by this environment. There has been an acceptance of telework for roles and functions that previously I would think were unimaginable as being ones that we would be willing to accept telework for some of the reasons like Scott had just noted, and I think for good reasons. And we're discovering ways that we can support our customers in the government and elsewhere with telework. So what does that mean to the Tri-County Council? One of the things that used to be just kind of an unstated assumption is people in Southern Maryland had an ability to be candidates for the workforce opportunities at Pax River and Indian Head and Dahlgren in ways that people in Arkansas and California didn't, just by sheer geographic connections. If the government customer is willing to accept telework, then industry can find, attract, onboard, and work with workers who aren't geographically tied to Southern Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
And in the constant battle for talent, the changing nature of what constitutes acceptable telework is something that I think this group will need to consider and account for and equip candidates to be not just targeting the geographically local opportunities, but potentially be nationwide competitive, because that may be the new normal in an acceptance of telework. So, I mean, I know at Smartronics, we have been able to attract and retain some talent who are not geographically tethered to the government customer on at least 2 of the contracts that we're executing. So for this body, something to think about as a differentiator going forward. Over.
Wonderful. We heard that back in July, that was a possibility, but it really depended upon the federal government accepting the fact that geographic connection is not necessary. So are you guys seeing any kind of move on the part of the feds to accept teleworking?
So at Smartronics, I know I would consider it's on a trial or pilot basis at this point, but yes, we have at least 2 contracts that I can think of where we've had folks who have been onboarded who are supporting a NavAir contract, one out west and one here on the East Coast, who are not in the same state as the customers that are supporting.
This is Chris Castellano. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Chris.
I think the jury's still out with employers. I think they were forced into teleworking with their employees because of the pandemic. And I think it's worked, like was just mentioned. I mean, we were kind of forced into it and people found out how to make it work. But I think employers are still unsure whether they want to have that as a full-time option, because we know there are advantages to having people come in the office at least some days. And that relates back to the first question in terms of people being at home and having their kids there. So if you're teleworking and your kids are there, okay. Well, if your employer is not quite sure what they're going to do in the future and they may be requiring you to come in, if you've got kids in middle school, elementary school especially, that's a situation that you have to figure out and answer. You have to figure out what you're going to do with your kids. So I think employers haven't quite decided whether they're going to continue full-time telework. I think the base right now is in the position of saying that they'll allow telework to the max possible, but there are people who work in labs and you need to be in physical spaces and they don't have that option. I think the schools, even for teachers, I think they're allowing or making teachers come in. But my next door neighbor was a contract special ed teacher for the district, and they told her she had to come in, and she quit because she has young kids and she has no option for them. Mm-hmm. So I think, like even here in the county, some of us are requiring employees to come back and some are not requiring us to bring employees back. So it's a kind of a mixed bag, and I think as we start drawing employees back, then it's a concern for those that have kids. And we haven't quite figured out whether we can do full telework. I think there are some advantages to that, clearly for employees and even for employers. People are pretty efficient, but there are a lot of advantages to having people at least a day or two during the week to come in and kind of be together and do brainstorming, exchange ideas that you just can't do with teleworking. I'm a little all over the map there, but I'm getting into topics.
Good points.
Yes, this is Ellen. I just wanted to comment. I certainly think that industry overall, because as Ruthie indicated, we're hearing this from other industry sectors as well, are looking at how this remote work environment broadens their reach into a labor force, very much to Doug's point about the ability to work with people from just about anywhere. What I'd be interested in hearing is, of course, you made these changes very rapidly out of necessity, but are you finding that some of the changes are really working for your organizations and considering that you'll keep some of it in place? Or are you still viewing this as your operations as in a temporary mode? Be very interested to hear that.
This is Dottie again. I think we're finding that some best practices are gleaming out of this. I think the government's even seeing that as well. I've heard that possibly contracts will be in a telework permanently and have been moved out of some of their offices already. Right now, many of us under contract have waivers because we had limitations that said 10% telework or not to exceed 10% telework. So we're under waiver orders right now. I think we're going to see greater acceptance of telework. It really depends on the clients. But I can tell you some other government organizations, for example, the Patent Office many years ago went to telework, but required people to come into the office 1 day a week. They then moved it to 1 day a month, but then you couldn't live further than 50 miles from the office. And it was a year later that they said it doesn't matter where you work. that when they have maybe a quarterly meeting, that you must find your way into the office wherever you're tied to. So those are, to me, when we start seeing this, I think it's going to roll in very similar cases to that. This was a fast push. We have government clients who never were supportive of telework now saying, hey, it's working. But I do think we still have contracts until they are permanently identified with the telework clause out of there. We're still on a temporary basis right now.
So given that scenario, I'd really like to know if you feel that that makes our region more competitive or places us at a disadvantage if the larger population can now compete across geographical borders without limits. Do you think that places us in a more competitive situation or a less competitive one?
I'm concerned about the community right now, because it does mean that I can have workers that can move to a lower cost area. Maybe they can move to North Carolina, South Carolina, where taxes are better for them, or Delaware, wherever it might be, and work. We're going to have to be mindful of where they're residing for the cost impact that it's having. But I think we're going to find more people moving out of this area. In fact, I've had 3 staff who felt while they're in this telework situation, why can't they move back to where their family is and do their job? Why do they have to stay in Southern Maryland? So it has me concerned for Southern Maryland as a whole, with taxes for Maryland and for the cost of living that for people to stay here.
Excellent point.
Yeah, this is Chris Castellamus back. I think it's probably better for the employers if they can attract people from outside the region, because it's been a challenge for many of them to attract people to Southern Maryland. But to echo what Dottie says, that's not such a good thing for our region. We want people to be here. I mean, we want this to be a community and people to be tied in and invested in our community. So if many people are not living here, that's not such a great community outcome in terms of living here and stuff. So I think it's got good and bad. I know that there are many employers who they have great jobs and they attract people down here, and sometimes the younger people, after 2 or 3 years, they end up not liking the area, not enough going on for them. They go back to more urban areas. So I think it's probably okay for them, but we want to have people here.
We have a question from Barbara Ives. First, she stated broadening the workforce by hiring outside the area is an option. Her question is how to support IT workforce outside a local secured work lab.
Any thoughts on that?
Barbara, that's leveraging, for larger companies, that's leveraging secure labs that we have elsewhere in lower cost communities, if that's where they want to live. Unfortunately, sometimes I feel like everybody wants to go to San Diego. So that means a continuing increase of that IT workforce in San Diego, or in those key pocket areas that people want or gravitating to right now.
Right, yeah, thank you, Dottie, for saying that. As you might know, I work with Dottie, Southern Maryland Navy Alliance in the workforce department. And my question is, we have such a need in our area for IT type jobs. There is so many jobs needed and not many people filling them. So my question is, we have lots of locally secured lab space here. So my thought was, the idea of hiring outside, maybe it is hiring from the outside, bringing it in.
And we have a question from Stephen Wall.
Hi. I think one thing that also I've been looking at and actually been getting some good feedback out in the community is kind of how HR departments are also going to have to kind of maybe augment, change, or add, questions to their hiring practices. And I look at it from kind of a psychological aspect. Like I know, I don't want to stereotype here, but generally a lot of engineers, IT professionals have a tendency in some cases to be introverts. I'd have several friends that are engineers that are loving this environment right now where, I am getting so much done at home. So I think it's going to be a combination where I think here after a few months, the businesses are going to have to look at probably the individuals and the volume output of those individuals, as well as going forward and hiring. Some people strive on this environment, but there are others that need that social interaction to really, I think, be have more of an output, from those employees. I think you're going to have kind of a unique situation where when you're hiring someone in, you almost have to ask those questions of, what kind of environment do you thrive in? And I just kind of putting that out there is just kind of, again, a psychological, sociological component to the whole teleworking process.
Thank you, Steve. Absolutely.
Yeah, good point.
The other thing is, this is Chris Kaslamski. The other thing related to workers and people maybe want to live someplace else, there's also been a lot of articles written about people leaving the urban areas and moving to the suburban and more rural areas, just because pandemics aren't, you don't want to be in an urban area with a pandemic. So I think I've spoken to a few realtors, and homes are selling 2-3 days sometimes around here now. So the housing market's super hot. So we may be seeing people from the DC area wanting to spread out a little bit and being in a more rural area. The other advantage is if you're spending more time in your house because you're teleworking, maybe you want something a little bit different. You want to have a nice place to have a home office. So there might be things working in opposite directions here.
Well, I think I'm hearing some very important points here that I want to make sure that we don't miss. I think I'm hearing that we need to really keep our eye on the ball, especially in terms of the contracting community, at changes that might be made around allowing or permitting teleworking long term, and what that might mean to the industry base here that's embedded with the DoD contracting or government contracting world. I think the other thing that we're hearing is that companies are starting to embrace and starting to see some best practices out of teleworking, and that may become a more permanent part of your workforce culture. So to that point, and to a very important point that Chris made a little while ago regarding culture in your organizations and in our community, what changes are you seeing in your corporate culture as a result of this new way of working that you applaud and want to maintain? And conversely, are there concerns that you have regarding those changes in your corporate culture as a result of the disparate working environment? I asked the question because I wonder if it's worth a broader conversation around the ability to maintain a corporate culture with a remote workforce, to have a broad industry discussion.
Could you repeat that question, please?
Certainly. With the changes that you've experienced, with now you have some people working from home, maybe some people in the office. Have you experienced some benefits of having, in terms of your corporate culture, have you experienced some benefits in having or instituting this remote work environment? Or are you experiencing or feeling some challenges? I'll give an example. You may have had a corporate culture previously where there were concerns. Some employees had concerns that not everybody had their own office. We're all in cubicles, and people felt like they were less valued than others because it was an equivocal space. But now that people are working from home, there's been a shift in your corporate culture and less of a concern around those types of issues. That's just an example. I see Bridget's hand is up.
Yeah, so this is Bridget Brown with ICF, and we're slightly different because prior to the pandemic, we had a partially remote workforce, but now we're fully remote where we can be. So in some ways, it's improved our corporate culture because one of the things we've been doing as managers and supervisors is increasing the communication and increasing, believe it or not, actually being on camera, which I'm not today. Sorry about that. So that there's more engagement with the staff. There's more planned engagement. We've been training our managers in different ways of communicating with staff, starting with the, are you okay as a person? Before jumping into, and these are the tasks that we're going to talk about today. So a more, I think, a strengthening our feeling of community and that we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm.
This is Chris Katsalamis. I think I almost have the opposite feeling. I think that productivity has been good. We get on Teams meetings and all the Zoom and all these meetings are good. But I think what we're missing is some of the social connections and some of those informal conversations we have with people when we're in the office. You know, when you have a Teams meeting and you got, you know, I have a small office, nine people, but when we're all have our faces here on the Teams meeting, you know, we kind of start the meeting. If I have people here in the office, I'm asking people about their weekends. I can have one-on-one conversations that are more personal. I'm making those connections. And that also reinforces the culture a little bit. I think when we get more and more teleworking, we miss some of that. And it ends up being, you know, you can have a little bit of chit chat before a meeting, but you kind of get into it. And then you go from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting. And in terms of what we're about and what's important to us, that comes through in some of the meetings. But I think some of that happens just on one-on-one conversations and when you're bumping into people in the hallways and things like that. So I think that's, for me, I think we missed that a lot. And I think we, you know, I may ask somebody as I'm passing them, how's your grandmother doing? Well, I may not pick up the phone and ask somebody that or text somebody that in a telework environment.
Go ahead, Scott.
You know, I agree with Chris. You know, I think, you know, I've never been much of a teleworker. I've always worked at the office, enjoyed the interaction. I'm a person that gets up and goes talk to people. People come into my office. So I've always enjoyed that interaction. So when we went to telework on the 17th of March, it was a paradigm shift for me. And, you know, I think with WebEx, in some ways, I do feel that I've been able to connect with people that I haven't interacted normally with, just because you see them, you know, everybody turns their camera on and you see them, you see kids, you see dogs and pets and everything else, and they become the stars of the meeting. But you know, I think it's gonna be a challenge. How do we continue to, you know, to build a workforce culture? You know, the secret sauce for Booz Allen is the fact that we you know, that we get under one roof and there's that energy. The bus is moving at 70 miles an hour. And I apologize, I have a landline and that's the ringing in the background. So you're going to probably hear my voicemail here in a second. So anyway, I think it's going to be a challenge. I'm hopeful that we can get back under one roof in some way, shape, or form. But I think the paradigm is changed significantly.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, this is Ruthie. That kind of leads to another question. Depending upon where telework is destined to be in your organizations, has anyone considered, or is anyone considering, or are we seeing a trend to reduce the footprint in commercial real estate? I know that Governor Hogan, from talking to some partners that we have in workforce in state agencies, Governor Hogan has given the edict to reduce footprint wherever possible. So some organizations are looking at permanent telework solutions. But in terms of private industries, anybody looking at reducing their corporate real estate footprint?
Ruthie, I'm not looking at reducing the footprint, but I was going to expand on the footprint. And right now I'm going to expand on lab space and other specialized space, but I will not expand on the office space that I was originally planning to do.
Mhm.
I see. So not necessarily cubicles and offices for your workers, but lab
Right.
space.
Right. And it doesn't mean that the volume of work is going down. It's in contrary, it's just being able to tap into telework and also allowing people to work from other remote locations is an option that wasn't on the plate earlier.
Right.
Douglas has a question.
Yeah, just from, I don't want to get out in front of, can you hear me? I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay? Over.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Very good. So from a Smartronics perspective, I don't want to get out in front of my leadership, but I will offer that we're learning our way through this because there's two countervening forces. There's the one force, which is more people are teleworking, so you need less footprint. The other force is, but if we want to achieve some of those things like Chris and Scott were noting about maintaining those connections and reinforcing that corporate culture through presence, you're going to need more floor space to do so safely. The concept of open offices where everybody can see each other and everybody's breathing the same air is obviously going to be a challenging paradigm if we're trying to do a return to work status. So I guess that my big takeaways are those two, is we're still learning our way through this, and we're having to balance between two competing priorities of having enough floor space to return to work safely for those people who do have to return to work in order to perform their function, and the opportunity to potentially shed some space. And the jury is still out on how exactly that'll shake out. Very much driven by customer acceptance, but also the previous the comment about corporate culture and how do you maintain that over the long term. Over.
This is Chris Katsalamis. I've heard the same thing. Maybe less space, fewer people coming in, but needing to space those people out a little bit more. So where they were close, now they need to be spaced out a little bit. We also did a little, very small survey in our office about commercial lease space. And in terms of defense contractors, we had 15 responses. 10 said they were keeping the same amount of office space. 1 said they were going to be expanding office space. 4 said they were going to be reducing office space, but one of those actually is reducing lease so they can build their own building. So mostly staying the same. I think the jury is still a little bit out, but for the short term, mostly the same, maybe a slight reduction, and then not knowing exactly how you're going to configure your office is also still to be determined.
Wonderful. So I have one final question, and then we'll certainly want to ask you as the audience if there's an issue that you want to bring to the table that you'd like us to get more information to you about as an industry, or that we can use as a topic for our next convening. We certainly want to do that. But so the last question that I have is, we've all pivoted. Just interested in knowing if any of you have started or engaged in any new lines of business in this environment. Did you find that there were new opportunities and new work that did not exist for your organization prior to the pandemic that as a result now you're engaged in? It doesn't sound like it.
This is Chris Castellanos. Here's not my organization hand story that I heard. Maybe an opportunity for smaller businesses, but getting back to the school issue, I heard that there's a karate school around that is offering for kids to come in, and they'll monitor, kind of proctor the kids during their school time. They'll do a little karate before, they'll monitor the kids during the day as they're doing online schooling, and then do some more karate afterwards. So it, again, for parents who don't have an option, they have to go in. That was a business opportunity that a small business kind of pivoted and took advantage of. Hey, kids need a place to go during the day, and they may need some help getting online with their schooling. So we're going to bring them here. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, and this is Ruthie. I saw another karate school that is all virtual. So that's interesting as well.
Yeah, there are all types of very interesting things that have occurred. Everything from virtual babysitting, I'm not quite sure how that works, to, of course, we're all aware of the businesses that pivoted and started making PPE and sanitizer early on. But as those business models have evolved, I wondered if we might be seeing new lines of work either coming out of the government or coming from the expanding IT needs of other smaller businesses in the region that need back office IT support, where there might be emerging growth opportunities. So thank you for that. So Ruthie, did you have any other questions, or are we going to open the floor for any remaining comments?
I don't have any further questions, but I would like to hear what's on your mind. Mm-hmm. So if there are topics, I'm certain there are topics we have not touched on today that may be of interest to the group. So please feel free to chime in.
This is Chris Castellanos again. Going back to the telework and employees, I think one of the things that has always been a lot of competition for good workers down here. I think employers are going to have to embrace teleworking and make sure that's an option they're offering people they're trying to attract. Because if I like teleworking at least some days a week, and I'm talking to a couple employers and one's not offering teleworking, I'm probably going to go with the one that does. So I think it's here to stay in terms of being competitive and attracting people. Employers better offer that as an option, at least part-time.
Good point.
That's an excellent point. Any other thoughts, needs? Yes, Douglas.
Yes, can you hear me? Over?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I'm speaking more here as delegate citizen of St. Mary's County rather than as a representative of my company here, in just making the observation of we talk a lot about telework for some of the knowledge type work that happens, but I think it's been brought up, for example, classified work. There's some classified work that just has to happen in secure spaces. Flight test, aircraft maintenance. There's a number of these highly specialized skills that are dependent on physical co-location. And so while the Tri-County region will be facing now an even greater potential war for talent, if knowledge workers can be no longer tethered, there is that opportunity for folks who do respond to, I like a kind of work that allows me to or requires me to be with my peers and colleagues. And ensuring that those physically dependent, specialized positions, that we're in a position to support that, while all these other knowledge positions, there's so much that's up in the air and so much that's changing. I don't know exactly what to do about that from either a regulatory policy or educational perspective to support that, but it's just that's something to keep in mind. There are some of these things that just will never be amenable to telework due to their very nature. Over.
Douglas, this is Ellen. Can I ask you a follow-on question to that? Do you feel like we have the infrastructure to support that? And the reason why I asked the question is, as everyone was talking earlier, particularly as the conversation came up about the lab space, I started thinking about the fact that there may need to be convening spaces, spaces where staff of different companies can get together to network, talk, meet, if they're not doing it daily, that companies can sort of pop in and out of. I guess sort of the WeWork models, but in a different version. So I just wondered, do you feel like we have the infrastructure to support that?
Boy, that's a great question. Think about the University System of Maryland in Southern Maryland, the higher ed center, right, and the NOCAD industry days that would happen out there, and just all the informal networking that can happen at a facility like that when people can be co-located, and all of the business thoughts that can get exchanged in that environment. Until we can come through all the medical challenges of putting a lot of people in proximity, no physical event like that is going to be safe or practicable. And so I'd say the jury is still out on what's the nature of the physical spaces that we need. That's going to be paced by some medical questions about, vaccination, herd immunity, and, how effective are masks. And that's a much bigger complicating factor. So I'd say it's too early to say we need some different kind of meeting space. I mean, the notion of, okay, we're going to have, HEPA filtration, and it's going to, we'll limit the number of people who show up to an indoor venue for something that has to happen in February or something. It's probably too early to commit to something like that as being necessary or vital, but it's definitely worth thinking about what's the nature of gathering spaces going forward. Over.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Yes, this is Ruthie. I can attest to that personally. I've been working with Leadership Southern Maryland on their Economic and Workforce Development Day for their class of 2021, and it took us weeks to find a venue where we could safely gather. So it's a challenge.
This is Steve Wall. I got one thing to add. Maybe Dottie can chime in on this, because we were, good deal of our discussion had to do with security clearances going back. And I know one of the things that came up about security clearances was the fact that, do people need it in certain jobs and certain roles? And I guess my question, maybe Dottie, if you could chime in, is now with this new world of teleworking, do you think that may change the dynamic with the defense industry and with the feds when it comes to how security clearances can be looked at, how they can be done, how we can get people in that are on the borderline with, security and issues and things like that?
Yeah, not predicting a pandemic would have happened, Steve. I think what we were trying to do is get the government in contracts to really assess, does an individual need a clearance to do that particular job, where they automatically went to say this person must be at this level, and then really get them to think about, does that individual, does a web developer have to have a clearance for a unclassified system? Now, given some of the stuff that's taking place and some of the up tempo, we might find that the government leans even more heavily that classified or work going classifieds might be more prevalent moving forward. So it just seems like things are fluctuating this year quite a bit. There was some efforts that they were kind of stepping back, saying, do we need this workforce to have a clearance? There's some probability that was not needed. We have individuals that have clearances that have never used the clearances or needed them. But we are seeing that there is an up-tempo that more will probably be going into a, let's say, sensitive nature of information being dealt with. So I don't know. It's fluctuated. Steve, I think it does make this telework more difficult to be successful. It's not like we're dealing in a commercial business where they're having a different response. And I see some of my colleagues that are doing commercial work. The telework is very easy for them to adjust to. This one's different.
this is Ruthie, that makes me question again what we talked about back in July about the security of working from home.
Hmm.
This is Chris. I know people who have jobs on base and they're in environments where they have to be there because they're insecure. They have secure systems they're working on, and because of their physical space, they've had them come in like every other day. And when those people are home, they're supposed to be like doing training and stuff like that. And there's only so much training you can do. So productivity has gone way down because really they can only do their work when they're in their office. But because their offices are configured to be close quarters, they can't have everybody in every day. So there's an issue there until they figure out the physical space because they have to be in, they're in classified environments on secure systems. It's not really working out.
Well, this has been a very, very robust discussion. It sounds like we have quite a bit as a community to keep our eyes on. Still so many unknown factors, but clearly telework and the impact to our corporate culture and our community culture is an ongoing conversation we need to have, as well as maybe some more information or intelligence around physical space and its use, as you know, as we envision what early 2021 might look like for us as a community. I think those will be important discussions going into our next quarterly meeting. Ruthie, did you have anything else to wrap up?
I do not. I just want to thank everyone for participating. This was a really robust discussion, much like we had in July. I love this industry. So I want to thank everybody for chiming in and joining us this morning, and we'll see you next go round.
Mm-hmm. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.